So let me start with a quote from Brother Lawrence. "We ought not to be weary of doing little things for the love of God, who regards not the greatness of the work, but the love with which it is performed." Now, as I was sharing with Lori a little bit before this started, I've been thinking about what I was going to say for about the past week. And I started out with one format, making it very much like a school sort of paper with a thesis statement and sub-arguments and everything. And it just was not gelling. So as I often do when I'm stuck on something like this, I went out for a bike ride and just sort of put the thought in my brain. And it came to me yesterday, Sarah, you tell stories. That's what you do. My trainee at work, who I've worked with now for 8.5 months, will tell you if I'm trying to explain something, I'm going to reach for an analogy. So how about I tell you a story? And how it actually deals with work and faith, we'll see if I address that by the time we get to the end, because you're going to see a little bit of how my brain works, which is somewhat scattered, folks. So I'm actually going to be talking about work, faith, but also my growth as a person and sort of my own personal foibles. So let's set the stage a little bit. So early life, the faith portion. I was born into the church. My father is a United Church of Christ minister, and the bulk of his ministry was as a conference minister, akin to a bishop here in the Episcopal Church. Mom's career was in teaching, counseling, and childhood development. And this included many years as Christian education director at the church we attended from the time I was in 3rd grade through high school. So try being a prickly teenager and having your mother as the youth group leader. I'm sure it wasn't easy for her either. One formative experience in my faith life as a middle teen was when I was 15. My father had the opportunity, he got his first sabbatical, a 3-month paid time away from his work. And he and my mother chose to go on a mission trip to work with the teachers at schools in Turkey that our United Church Board for World Ministries supported. And we heard the story when we were in Turkey, because I got to go too. I got to skip the first 10 weeks of high school. I actually took 10 weeks of homework with me, but we heard the story about how in the 1920s, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk became the political power in Turkey, and he secularized the nation. So all of the mission groups that existed at that time were invited to stay, but they could no longer proclaim their religion. They could no longer evangelize. Many of the other mission groups decided that they were going to leave. These schools and the mission work that the board was doing said, we're going to stay. Because if we can't proclaim by the way we live that there is something different about us, we're not doing it right. And that lesson just sort of like really snuggled into my brain and into my heart. Later on, 1991, my husband, Ken, whom I'm now divorced from, but Ken and I joined St. Paul's in 1991. I transferred over to the Episcopal Church shortly after that, which is only the one, it's the one small wrinkle I have with the Episcopal Church. Since I came from a church that was not an apostolic succession church, I couldn't be received. I had to be confirmed. I'm sorry, folks, but I was confirmed when I was 13 back at my home church in UCC. So Ken very rightly refers to me as the Episcopal Oreo. Episcopal on the outside, UCC in the middle. So that's early life faith. How about early life work? My parents told my brothers and me that they didn't care what we did for our professions, as long as we helped people. And along with that was a very broad understanding of what it meant to help people. Also, I never did have a very clear or strong idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up. Now, some personal foibles that I deal with still today, but were much stronger when I was younger, had a lot to do with my work path and my journey in faith. I hate disappointing people. My stomach ties itself in knots if I feel I've not measured up to usually some self-imposed standard. Now, these are problematic in that these emotional tendencies are combined with a knee-jerk instinct to run the comparison game. So with intelligent family members who love to discuss a broad range of topics, best friends from childhood and in college who are each academically brilliant, and then marrying someone who is scarily book smart, you might guess I might have had some issues finding my own way and really owning my own worth. Let's paint a little bit more of that emotional picture. I haven't dealt much with the Enneagram recently, but when I went back to look at my results from several years ago, I'm a type 2, which is a giver. Myers-Briggs, if you know that, I'm an ENFJ, extroverted, intuitive, feeling, judging. The judging means I feel better after a decision is made rather than having all the choices open before me. And then the one that, of course, that will tell you the most, what Hogwarts house am I? When I take the online sorting hat stuff, I'm almost scarily even among all 4 houses, which doesn't help. However, I self-identify as a Hufflepuff. We don't know much about the Hufflepuffs, but I think that they are the sort of person who is content doing an unglamorous job in the background. So while I didn't know what I wanted to do for my work, I did know that I didn't want to go into counseling, teaching, or the ministry. Attempting to do those things that my parents did so well was just inconceivable. I couldn't handle even the thought of coming up short in any comparisons, self-imposed. So didn't even go into those. Interesting that in the next generation, we have 3 of the 4 grandchildren who are in teaching or counseling. Now, fortunately, I have 2 uncles who were engineers, and they encouraged my interest in math and science, and parents who supported whatever I wanted to do. I ended up pursuing a physics degree in college with wide-eyed thoughts of saving the world by using solar energy to heat and cool buildings, totally ignorant of the fact that Jimmy Carter's solar energy incentives were dwindling away as I was getting my degree. So I floundered work-wise until I was 30 years old. It took me 2 tries to get through grad school. And then with a master's in civil engineering, I waited tables and did mind-numbing data entry. I actually toyed with the idea of starting the ordination process to become a deacon. Those of you who know Kent Curtis, he and I approached Father Bacon at the same time to start the discernment process. However, after the initial paperwork and self-reflection, I realized I was drawn to the process of learning rather than actually feeling a call to ministry. Maybe particularly because my father is ordained, I already had a pretty firm conviction that I needed to be sure I was experiencing a real call to ordination, and I wasn't. At 30 years old, I landed a glorified customer service job at Loveland Water and Power. The best thing that happened to me there was an opportunity to learn a cranky, persnickety, intricate piece of software that deals with the retrieval and processing of electric meter data. 4 years later, the knowledge of that software was my ticket to a job at the Department of Energy, where I've now been for just over 25 years. Now, in the months before I switched from Loveland Water and Power to Department of Energy, I'd actually been in career counseling because I did not find my work personally or emotionally fulfilling. The most useful thing in that counseling was taking the strong interest inventory. I found this incredibly helpful because it focuses on a person's interests and not their skills. This is from a website, if you are not familiar with the strong interest inventory. The inventory assessment helps individuals identify their work personality by exploring their interest in 6 broad areas. I won't list all 6, but the 2 that came up for me are social, as in directly helping people, and investigative. Surprising absolutely no one, I scored very highly in the social category, with sample jobs that might be a good fit for me being teacher, counselor, minister. Also not surprising to those who know me well, which did not include me at this time, was a strong outlier interest in investigative work or research/problem solving. So when I was provided the opportunity to interview for a position at DOE for a job that involved working with this cranky software, when my current job only let me play with that software 20% of the time, I leapt at the chance. Now, if you were here last week, Demetrius described his work, which he actually didn't talk about very much in detail, as functional. I love that description. It was like, I think that's what my job is. It can be perhaps routine, perhaps behind the scenes, perhaps a little bit mundane. I look at my job as about 1/3 engineering, technical, 1/3 sorting out data, and 1/3 customer service. And I'm good at it. I love the technical challenge, the puzzle aspects of how garbled data might be sorted through, and the ever-present challenge of making things more efficient. I also just love the let's just cruise this aspect of the more routine parts of my work. Okay, so I've talked a lot about work, but here we are sitting in church. So where does faith come into all of this? Faith Journey, Part 1, Using One Gifts, or How to Be Happy as an Excel Wizard and Doyen of Data. Let me read you a bit from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where God wants it. How strange a body would be if it only had one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. In fact, some of the parts of the body that seem weakest and least important are actually the most necessary. It took until I was in my 30s, but at last I realized that my God-given talents of technical problem solving, coupled with a strong commitment to great customer service, was really a service not only to my company and our customers, but also living into my own gifts and uniqueness as a person. And the fact that I've become adept with my quirky software has helped heal much of the imposter syndrome beliefs that I had held for a long, long time. It wasn't the only thing, but it has been a great healing of that weakness or foible in me. And this in turn helps me hear God's word better. I'm this weird mixture of always trusting in God and a poor little portion of me always suspecting that God's love and forgiveness and acceptance is for all of you wonderful people. And maybe I don't deserve it. So healing that imposter syndrome has helped me in my faith journey as well. There's also the fact that I'm a civil servant. That is what my job description is, civil servant. A servant of my fellow citizens. Every employee in the executive branch takes some form of this oath. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter. So help me God. So at this point, we could talk quite a lot about serving others and servant ministry and all that entails. However, that discussion would either take no time at all or a week. So let's move on. Faith Journey, Part 2, Meeting God everywhere. In any job, just about, and I think I can argue for any, even for those people who work alone, but let's not go down that rabbit trail. In any job, you're interacting with people. And if you're interacting with people, you are meeting God. Therefore, you bring yourself and your faith to that encounter and have the opportunity to do God work along with work. And yes, given the blessing that I've had of working at the same place for 25 years, I have developed deep friendships at work and deep work friendships. And I've had the opportunity to discuss very deep subjects: terrorism, school shootings, suicide, particularly after the death of my brother in 2009, how difficult parenting can be, how difficult marriage can be, divorce and its aftermath, and a couple very scary times with some of my more fundamental coworkers, human sexuality. Because I wanted to witness to them that one could be a Christian and have a different outlook. And it's not the work that I do that brought those conversations in. It was the fact that I was interacting with fellow humans. So it's my belief that this type of interaction, whether you go deep or whether you just smile at the clerk whom you're buying something from, is a moment to do God work. Faith Journey, Part 3, Vocation, Career. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a career is a profession for which you train and pursue. Vocation alludes to the spheres of influence you are called to. It's the meaningful work through which God uses us to serve others. My faith journey and my life here at St. Paul's has actually had a very direct effect on my career. Early on at DOE, several folks suggested that I find a work mentor who could groom me for a management track. However, I was having too much fun with my finicky software and didn't follow up on that. Then, at a time when St. Paul's was in its interim period after Father Bacon's retirement, I was elected to the vestry. After a year, I became senior ward. This was the year that St. Paul's called Bob Davidson as rector, and Vicki Kemp, our interim, would be leaving us. Up until the weeks later for Bob's installation by Bishop O'Neill, things were jumping with all the changes and the excitement and just going into a new normal. It was all good. Then there was a kerfuffle. Suffice it to say that the next while was a whole lot of chaos and change management. What I learned during this time, I was senior ward for that year and the following, is that I'd learned a great deal, seemingly by osmosis at my parents' knees, about dealing with chaos and conflict, as well as leadership skills. It seemed that I was an effective and competent leader. However, I also learned that I will hold no management position in any organization that I am not passionate about. The personal emotional toll was one I was willing to offer to St. Paul's for those tumultuous years. I would not ever do it for my job. During those years, I also reconfirmed my decision not to pursue ordained ministry. One night, after a lengthy phone conversation with Bishop O'Neill about the kerfuffle, he commented, "Once this is all over, we'll have to see about getting you into the ordination process." At this point, I was in no doubt that at least at that time, I did not have a call for the ordained ministry. So I informed him in no uncertain terms that he'd best be happy with having me as a committed member of the laity. So if I'm not passionate enough about my job to expend more emotional energy into it, doesn't that mean it's not a good fit? Let me read you a story. This comes from Kitchen Table Wisdom by Rachel Naomi Remen, collection of short essays. She writes of a great Italian psychiatrist whose name I am not going to try to pronounce because I would butcher it. This psychiatrist wrote a parable that pretends to interview three stonecutters who are cutting stone for a cathedral in the 14th century. When the interviewer asks the first stonecutter what he is doing, the man replies with bitterness that he is cutting stones into blocks, a foot by 3/4 of a foot. With frustration, he describes a life in which he has done this over and over and will continue to do so until he dies. The second stonecutter is also cutting stones into blocks, but he replies in a somewhat different way. With warmth, he tells the interviewer that he is earning a living for his beloved family. Through this work, his children have clothes and food to grow strong. He and his wife have a home which they have filled with love. But it is the third man. His response gives us pause. In a joyous voice, he tells of the privilege of participating in the building of this great cathedral, so strong that it will stand as a holy lighthouse for 1,000 years. I think it's pretty easy to see. Third stonecutter has it right? He's got it. He understands. He is doing his job joyfully and he sees the bigger picture. I'm not the third stonecutter. Nope.
It's okay to be the second stonecutter.
Exactly.
I need to know.
And the second stonecutter, as Betsy said, is exactly who I am. So the third stonecutter, he's lucky. He's really lucky that he finds such personal and emotional fulfillment in his work. Now, I've been blessed to have a job that I really enjoy, but doesn't take that much of an emotional toll on me. So during my years of active parenting, I could attend to what I felt was my true vocation at the time, which was trying to be a good enough parent and sinking my emotional energy into my girls and into my marriage. And I was blessed in many, many ways during this time. To this day, my understanding of prayer and being in the now is tied to a specific moment when I witnessed the nowness of Emma playing with a rattle when she was just learning that her hand was her own. Anne, with her exuberance for climbing trees, even at church, which often freaked out many of the other parents at church, taught me to be a little less fearful in seeking out joy. Okay, that's fine. But Sarah, your kids are now responsible adults and your marriage is over. So what's your vocation now? That's a really great question. And I'll probably have a pretty good answer for you in about 10 years. What I can say is that for the last 3 years since my divorce, I've been learning how to take care of myself. For 30 years, I was a caretaker of others, of my children, of our family, of the marriage. And in those years, I often put myself pretty far down on my own to-do list. So in the past 3 years, I've been learning to give myself time and attention that I didn't seem to be able to find in years past, and to be patient to see what other work God has for me to do, and that it's okay to coast for a while. So here's the last thing I want to offer you. During the time of Vicki Kemp's interim, we had the good fortune, I don't know how it turned out, but we had the good fortune to have a visit to St. Paul's by Jim Cotter. Jim Cotter was, I believe, an Anglican priest from the United Kingdom. He was a writer, and he was the first, I shouldn't say first, he was an early openly gay person who spoke. I think he was publicly interviewed about being gay. I think the title was something like, I'm gay and God knows it, or something like that, in 1977. Absolutely wonderful man. When he was visiting St. Paul's, he had some of his books with him along, and one of them was this one, Waymark's Cairns for a Journey. It's a daily devotional. It has little short reflections, essays, day by day. And it's not dated ST year, so it's an evergreen sort of book. I was sad to find out when I looked this up yesterday, just to get some of Cotter's details, that he actually died in 2014 from leukemia at a pretty young age, too young age. Anyway, when I first read the reflection for the 2nd of April, it struck me between the eyes and in my heart, and has resonated ever since then. So let's close with this. The many cannot avoid the paid work that keeps the world moving, the kind of work that is similar everywhere, not the least the cleaning of streets, offices, parks, homes, and the maintenance of buildings, and the administration of institutions, in the service of health and education and local authorities. Only a few can find paid work, and sometimes that pay is little, if at all, which is unique to them, in which their singularity can flourish. They are the artists and the clowns, the future bearers. The rest of the community depends on them to take life forward so that life does not become stuck in endlessly repeated routines. They, of course, depend on the others for their food, shelter, clothing, and care. It may be that the work of the many is a job, and the work of the few a vocation. It may be that we are called to both chores and creativity. And if God is everywhere or nowhere, then a job has as much value as a vocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
You are quite welcome.
Like it, that was fantastic. And I love the difference in ways people present it. And you had yours written down, quotes, and the time you put into it. Thank you. I've learned so much more about you.
Here we go. It was very self-illuminating to do this process. It really was. So
Well, all of you will have a chance to do it as well, because this series will return next year. So we'd love to hear from more of how work has taken into work.